So thank you guys. I don't know what happened. I don't know where everybody went to, but I am Dr. Anita Pascal. I prefer to go by Anita. This is Dr. Matt Morano, and we are here today to present a bunch of information about medical admissions, but more importantly than anything, to really answer a lot of your questions that you may have about this admissions cycle. Cycle's coming up. So without further ado, because there's a lot to cover, let's get rolling. And basically, just wanted to let you know a little bit about us. So this is me. I've been doing this. I'm a freaking dinosaur, people. I'm turning 56 this year, or this month actually, and I've been doing this for over 20 years. I've counseled well over 10,000 applicants. Actually, I'm double boarded in reproductive health and family planning. So when I actually came out of medical school and residency, I worked for the World Health Organization. So a lot of the folks from the CDC and the WHO that have been talking are actually former colleagues of mine. I did reproductive health and family planning for third world countries before then working for an R1, D1 institution. So I've been on all sides of this because I've been a pre-med that went to med school. I've been the counselor at the undergraduate level, and then I work for 5 different MD and 1 DO programs and sit on admissions committees. So kind of seeing it from all the different perspectives. And my partner and colleague here, Dr. Morano, has also, there we go, has a PhD in educational psychology. And so he's a licensed therapist and has worked for over 20 years. Actually done a lot of work. If you've got dental admissions, please talk to this guy because he knows it, if that's an interest of yours as well. But much like me, has worked at the medical school and dental school level for years. So let's get talking a little bit about the medical admissions landscape and kind of what we're looking at. And I want to give you the typical applicant timeline, but then think more about where we're headed. But before I do that, what I'd really like to do is to get a sense of everybody who's here with us today. Why is my poll not wanting to engage? Come on, let's go. All right. And well, our poll is not showing up. Well, I guess I just won't get to know what you guys are, because I really wanted to know, to get a sense of where you guys were planning to apply and the time that you were interested to apply. But don't worry about that. We'll move on from there. So let's talk about what it takes to get into med school, okay? So each year, and this is actually based on last year, there are about 53,000 applicants to med school, and there are only 20 to 21,000 spots every year. So if you do the math on that, you're looking at everybody who applies, only about 41 to, on any given year, it's usually about 40 to 42% are going to get an acceptance. So that's kind of straightforward math. That means about 60% of people are going to be left behind without an acceptance, with a denial. So if we're looking at that, what we see is 40% accepted, 60% denied. Well, of that 60% that get denied, about 50% of these kids actually have good GPAs and strong MCAT scores and still get denied. So our big question is, well, y'all always preach to me, get good grades, get good MCAT scores. If I got all those and still 50% of these folks are going to get denied, why? We're going to talk a little bit more about that today. So it is a numbers game because we continue to see the numbers increase. And if you're looking from 2015 all the way to 2018, comparing applicants and matriculates, people who actually end up going on to medical school, what we're seeing is year after year, both the MCAT and the GPA are continuing to rise. So if you looked at last year's statistics, the average mean MCAT score was about 505. And if you guys are going to look, and we'll see in a few minutes, that's actually about, if you're looking at where the numbers come out, with an average GPA of about 3.57. And the thing is, if you think about, 3.5, almost a 3.6 GPA, all of your colleagues, your friends, your family are like, wow, you're so smart. You've done so many incredible things, but you're in a pool of people exactly like you. But if you look at the numbers of people who are actually accepted, the average MCAT score last year was about a 511 with an average GPA of around 3.7. What we say is 365 to 375, and that makes up our 41%. So it's a very, very competitive field. Oh, apologies. Oh, what happened to my screen? All right, well, I don't know what happened there. I have never had this happen before. All right, I'm going to end this show and bring it back up, and my apologies, guys. I have no idea what happened there. All right, let's go by the numbers. All right, so if you're looking at figuring the number of applicants to matriculates, we've already said that we've seen an increase year over year of about 1 to 2%. If you're looking at male to female, the average admitting age is about 24 to 25, and the number is about 49 to 51%. So it's not enough to split hairs over, but about roughly 50-50. If you're considering in versus out of state, the number who apply, there are about 23% apply in state and 77% apply out of state. But the numbers that matriculate are actually flipped when you look at that. A lot more people end up going to in-state schools. And again, there's a priority to that. If you look at North Carolina, where I'm from, if you look at our in-state schools that take out-of-state applicants, you're going to have about 75 to 80% of those are going to be in-state with about 20% out of state. Osteopathic DO programs actually are going to show a greater number of a little bit lower GPA and a little bit lower MCAT score that they're accepting, but we are seeing year after year that these numbers are also starting to increase. And actually this year, I'm looking for this number to be closer to about 506, 507, and an average of about 3.5. If we're talking about in or out of state, we actually divide the country into 4 different regions. One of the really interesting stats I think here is looking at California and Washington. So if you're looking at that total of almost 53,000, a quarter of that is comprised in just these 2 states. And so we know it's often very, very difficult for our California residents to actually even get into their home state. So just things to think about. Also, if you're looking at MCAT by GPA and MCAT by race and ethnicity, this table will give you a little bit of this information. And guys, don't worry about this. After this presentation, everybody who attended and registered, I'm going to send you a link to this actual recording as well as this PowerPoint so you can have these numbers to go back over. But again, if you're looking at the number of applicants, we're seeing this increase year by year, and you look at the number of matriculates and their MCAT and GPA, gives you a little bit. So this is where I often tell a lot of my applicants, if you have an interesting aspect of your background or whatever, please make sure to note that on your application. Again, we're trying to really make sure that we get a great distribution across all different races and ethnicities. So getting into med school. So let's start talking about the facts. I often liken this into like moving from college athletics to the pros. And let me sort of put that in context for you. If you are a strong high school athlete, a really, really good athlete, there's a chance that you're going to get a look by a college team or even to walk on. But the number of kids who go from college athletics to actually gain a spot in the pros is infinitesimally small. And it is because the strategy by which they actually evaluate those people is so much stricter. It's the same thing. Bright kids know they're going to get into medical school. They've got the into college. They've got the things that they need. But it is such a greater filter for everybody's got strong GPA, strong MCAT scores, strong experiences. It is going to be so many more people trying to get those coveted spots. So what do you need? Let's talk first about the timeline. And again, this is really going to change with respect to looking at where we are in terms of this year's cycle, which is going to be so different. By the way, if you guys have questions as we go along, please make sure to just include them in the chat box below. And at the end, Dr. Morano and I will try to go through as many of those as we can. And if not, afterwards, we'll try to get you that information as well. So if you're looking at the application timeline, it's a full year cycle. So we know that the applications open in May. They're going to open next month for you to start to key all your information in to submit the end of May. And if you're looking at osteopathic programs, anytime within May. Typically what we say, and we look for those MCAT scores, we should have already tested by now. Everything's going to change with respect to that. But what we often see is when kids that I'm working with individually, I like to them in the year before. So in November and January, before they even start to do anything in May, we start them drafting their personal statement, gathering their letters of recommendation, giving their letter writers a deadline of like the end of April to make sure they get all their letters together. We utilize February February and March and April to really start revising that personal statement. And this is a big mistake I see people often make. They're like, sit down to crunch out that personal statement in a couple of weeks. This is not like a term paper you do overnight or type thing. You really want to do this over multiple drafts, really thinking about it, so that by the time May comes in, you're sending your transcript and you're ready to key everything. But what we often find is people don't even begin drafting that personal statement until April, and they start categorizing all their experiences. And you're going to see in a few minutes when I talk about this, your first line screen is going to be on your GPA and your MCAT. If you make it through that screen, we're going to be screening on your experiences, not your personal statement. Knowing what you bring to the table is going to be so critical. The average medical school is going to get about 10,000 applications for 300 to 500 interview slots. Okay, so first of all, we're going to have to whittle down all of that mass of applications. We're going to spend about 3 to 4 minutes reviewing every application. First screen is going to be an electronic screen that's going to get them through that GPA and that MCAT. So are you in those parameters? The second screen is actually going to be an electronic screen that is going to be based on all of your experiences that you put in. And when I talk about your experiences, AMCAS allows you 15 experiences and 3 most meaningful. They have specific categories, and we give different weight to that. How much research, how much clinical experience, how much service you have. So it's going to spit out a grid that says there are this many service categories for this many hours for this length of exposure. So how you actually categorize and list your experiences can determine the score you get on that experiences rating. If you don't pass that rating, they may never even look at that personal statement in terms of that base screen. So it is important to make sure you know what you bring to the table and are you prepared before you go in. By April, you should be finalizing your personal statement, your experiences, have all your letters of recommendation pulled together so that you can use May to send your transcripts, key, submit your primary application in June, and then June and July, when we release to schools the end of June and July should be writing your secondaries. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about the reality about your secondaries. In a traditional year, we would start interviewing anywhere between August and January, some tail end to February and March. Those are the later ones that are coming out. With letters of continued interest going out to school somewhere in the November, December timeframe. This is the biggest mistake that people make. They put so much focus into, oh my goodness, my primary application, and it's out the door without even thinking about what's going to come second. All of those secondaries, the interview trail, how long it's going to take. Oftentimes I talk to students and I'm like, how many schools are you going to apply to? And they're like, I'm going to apply to anybody who can take me. And I'm like, people, y'all put more research into the sneakers you're going to buy than where you're going to invest a whole lot of money and where you're going to plan to go to med school. So planning all aspects of this, not only the primary application, is critical. So the primary application typically in a normal year will open in May and submit the end of May, with the idea that your secondary applications will go out in June and August and interviews that day and beyond. We already know this year, with MCAT already canceled for the end of March, April, and now into May, likely going to be canceled throughout May, that a lot of folks who had been banking on getting that first score in so that they could retest are now going to be testing into June and July. I'm going to give you some strategy about how to handle that at the end of this talk, but I don't want to cover too much of that right now. All right. But one of the things you want to do is really take a holistic view of what you bring and where you are. The Princeton Review actually published a couple of webinars last week by Rob Franek, our editor-in-chief, talked with advice from me about how to deal with your application with regard to online coursework, pass, fail, as well as dealing with experiences and tests that you may not have. I will make sure when we send out a follow-up to all of you guys about this, that I will also make sure to include links to those webinars so you can listen to that. So to sum all of this up, okay, we're looking at about 53,000 people who are going to apply to get 21,000 slots. Overall, the average admitting GPA is about 365 to 375. So the first thing you want to do is step back and take stock of yourself and go, where's my GPA? And by the way, science GPA holds almost equal weight with that total GPA. All right. So the first thing you have to say is, well, if my GPA is going to be a little bit below that, what else do I bring to the table? So if your GPA is more around the 3.4 to 3.5 range, then you're going to need a really strong MCAT score to kind of offset that, or keep in mind the schools you're choosing. The average MCAT score is about 509 to 511. And remember, we said that the average matriculate was 511. Oftentimes our rule of thumb is 509 is going to get you through most screens. 512 makes most schools go, whew, I think they know what they're talking about. 515 starts to turn heads. If your GPA is a little bit lower, what we often say is you want to balance that out on the other side with a stronger MCAT score. Where we generally say is the minimum requirements for MD is at a minimum of 3.3. If you are ranging around this area, you're going to probably need an MCAT score closer in that 516 range to balance that out, knowing where our average is. The average MCAT is about a 508 to a 509. Again, this is those parameters that I talked about. But if you get the baseline GPA and MCAT, we still know 50% of those people are getting denied. And that's because they're missing the other stuff. They're not balancing it with strong clinical, strong research, and strong service. We'll talk about that more coming up. But clinical experience, typically we say a minimum of 100 hours total in 3 to 4 different disciplines. And I always say diversity is better over quantity. We would far rather see somebody with 150 hours in 3 to 5 different types of disciplines than 400 hours in just one. Paid experience is always going to help. We talk about being a CNA or an MA, an EMT, or a scribe. I'll talk more about that when I talk about clinical experience. But this is oftentimes where we hear schools saying a gap year, a gap year. I have kids come to me all the time and they're like, I'm graduating in 3 years. I'm going, yeah, that doesn't really impress us. We're not looking for Speedy Gonzalez. We're looking for the person who has balanced themselves. And that's why gap years are becoming much more popular. People who take that year outside the academic bubble after they graduate, work, gain experience, learn what it's like to pay bills, work with people just like they're going to be treating. If you have lower credentials, you need to be considering a time to address that. And I get this all the time. Guys, I mean, pre-meds are often like hamsters on a treadmill. They're out there just trying to get through everything because it's like, oh my goodness, I got 4 years of college, I got 4 years of med school, I got to do a residency. Well, when you're a dinosaur like me, you realize that taking an additional year to be the best applicant you can be, either getting a master's, getting additional experience, makes all the difference in the world when you come out on the other side. One of the things we tell students is, you know, you're already going to be competing against tens and thousands of people for those coveted interview spots. But the other problem is twofold. If you're not prepared, because I get kids all the time who go, I just want to put my application out there so that they can see I'm really interested. We got 10,000 applicants. We don't need to know that you're really interested. And the problem is, if you apply and you don't have the base credentials you need to a school, it looks like you're uninformed. If you apply and you get denied, the reapplicant standards at most schools that you apply to are even higher than first-time applicants. And more schools are going to a policy where if you reapply the first year after getting denied, they automatically deny because they expect you to fix and have time to fix the reasons you didn't get in. And oftentimes they figure you probably didn't realize that and didn't get the things done. So unless you can totally back that up, and sometimes many of the schools, especially on the West Coast and the East Coast, are going to automatic denials the first year. So if you're not ready, you could be looking at 2 years or more. If your credentials are lower, you need to consider other options. So if your GPA starts to, and I honestly start to fall below a 3.4, you need to be willing to consider not only osteopathic, which is not a bad route, guys. And I will tell you completely, especially since now residency programs are open to MD and DO applicants, but to also consider doing a master's. And one of the things that we often talk about is kids will say, well, my GPA is a little bit lower, so I'm going to take some additional additional undergrad classes. Well, if you remember early on when you didn't have a lot of credits and you did really good, you could really move the needle on your GPA. But by the time you've got 100, 110, 115 hours, and you take a few extra undergrad classes, you're not going to be able to change your GPA a lot. So you should either look at a science-based master's, oftentimes where people will go wrong because they'll add a non-science master's, and that really doesn't help us see that you can do master's level coursework. And if you don't want to do a whole master's, a minimum of 20 to 30 hours of master level science-based coursework before you apply. And that's the thing. Oftentimes people will go, well, I'm going to start a master's in the fall and apply at the same time. How do we know how you're going to do? By the time you apply, we have nothing to base that on. If your GPA is definitely below this 3.2 range, or your MCAT is a sub 500, definitely think about taking additional time. You may want to consider a gap year, Caribbean programs, or like I said, completing that master's degree. So a strong MCAT score can help offset a lower GPA. What we saw last year is kids with like a 3.3 who were accepted had MCAT scores of 519 or above. But a poor MCAT score kills a 4.0 GPA time and time again. There is such strong weight. And again, you guys go, and trust me, I don't feel like one test score should make the difference, but it does. And kids go, why is there so much weight on the MCAT? Because the idea is that a strong MCAT score is a predictor of board scores. And you go, well, why is that important? Well, for on the med school side for us, it's about the dollars, because a strong MCAT score often reflects a strong board score. A strong board score will determine residency placement. Strong residency placement determines the money that we get back as a med school and the type of students we can recruit. So at the end of the day, there is a very altruistic point on the part of med schools. We're trying to increase the number of good students that are going to determine our residency placement and the money we get back. So when should you take the MCAT? Most years, we're saying you want to test by early spring to allow you to retest into April and May. Well, we already know that that sets some people behind. So on the med school level, I've been hard at work talking to med schools across the country and med schools that I work with. So I've been talking to med schools from California to the East Coast, and we're all saying the same thing. We know that this year is going to be a whole lot like 2015 was when we changed the MCAT, which meant there will be later test dates, likely running into September or October, potentially even in December. So that will help people who are going to have to test later. We know that in the screening parameter, oftentimes people are going to be applying, submitting secondaries without test scores. So we're going to have to look for later test scores. That does not mean everybody's totally off the hook, because you've got to remember you're already competing with a competitive pool, many of whom have already tested prior to March and will be able to go ahead and apply. So there's going to be a lot of strategy with this. One of the things that we tell people is, and this is very, very important, okay, if your MCAT was canceled March, April, May, potentially even into June, okay? And I'm thinking right now, we don't know, nobody has a crystal ball, but they've already canceled midway into May. I look for them to cancel through the rest of May. So you want to look for later June into July test scores, which unfortunately will be your first test date. You will want to test, wait 48 hours after testing, and schedule a retest date. So you've got that on the books if you need it. Now, here's the important part. You go, what does that have to do with when I apply? We recommend, if you're planning to apply this year, do full stock of yourself. Figure out, is my GPA strong such that if my MCAT is strong, I will be able to go on? Look at your experiences, and we'll talk more about those. But am I going to have, if I have that strong GPA and I do well on my MCAT, am I going to have good experiences to back that up? Think about where you're testing right now on your practice test. So if your practice test scores are going to be reflective of supporting your MCAT and you've got really, really good experiences, one of the things you might think about is when the application opens in May, go ahead and submit so that AMCAS can review all of your application. That is if your practice test scores are already strong on your MCAT. But what about if you're borderline? Maybe your GPA is in the 3.5, you're not quite sure about your experiences, and your test scores now are still running in that 505 range. You're not sure you're going to be able to get them up enough. What we recommend is when the application opens the end of May, you want to submit to some super, super, super reach school that you know you will never get into, and it won't matter if after all this you're a reapplicant to that school. Allow AMCAS to go ahead and process your application. That way you can test in June or July, wait on that test score and be verified. And you go, well, why would I want to do that? Because when you submit, there is a 4 to 6 week time frame where AMCAS is doing nothing with your application but verifying you. No med school, nobody looks at you. No med school can see who you applied to till they release to them the end of June, 1st of July. But here's the kicker, okay? About 85% of schools automatically generate secondaries. Why? Because there's such a massive applicant pool. They want to go ahead and get that part out of the way. Plus, it's also about this because every secondary that they get back is a little bit more money for the admissions office. But they get those in so that when med schools actually truly start looking at your application around the end of July to mid-August, they've already got all the criteria they need. So if you meet the criteria, they've already got your secondary. If you don't meet their criteria, just filling out a secondary is no guarantee we will ever look at it. But what that allows you to do, if you submit to that super reach school, you test in June or July, if your score's good enough, you've already been verified. You can add all those other schools instantly, fill out those secondaries in July and August, and not be too far behind. But if your score's not where you want it to be, and with all of this mess, you go, you know what, I think I'm going to wait a year, then you're only a reapplicant to that one super reach school. So there's a lot of strategy at play here where we can really help you guys be the best that you can be. So some quick breakdown on the MCAT, just so you guys know, we've already posted a link down in the chat line that'll allow you guys to sign up for all of the MCAT strategy sessions for the rest of this week. But basically, it is a grueling exam, and it is about preparing and practice test, practice test, practice test. The biggest mistake I see people make, I will get them, they'll be ready to test in like 2-3 weeks, and they have taken 2, maybe 3 practice tests. Guys, would you get up this morning and go, I think I'm going to go run a marathon, and have never run more than like a mile? Well, it's the same thing with your MCAT. It doesn't matter how much you've reviewed all the content. If you're not physically fit to take that exam, and I mean, you should be setting this time in every weekend, doing a practice test, getting yourself in condition so that you are prepared in all 4 areas of the MCAT. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because you guys will be talking about this the rest of the week with the other reviews, but getting prepared for this MCAT that has equally allocated sections, and you want to be consistent across all the areas. One of the other things you want to see is that you want to be above the 50th percentile in every specific area. Sometimes people will get their test scores, and we know that more and more schools are screening out. If you are below 50% in any one category, they may automatically screen you out in that area as well. So when you're thinking about the scoring percentiles, typically what we see is most people are here, obviously in the 50% range, which is around 500 to 501. But where you want to be is in this 510 to 514 range, here or higher, which is going to put you, if you look at the breakdown, at least in about the 83rd percentile. So somewhere between 77% and 83%. Remember what I told you, the people who had the lower GPA were scoring in this much higher range. Oftentimes schools are looking at, well, they may have had some hiccups early on, or the testing or the school, what they have, but clearly they've demonstrated that they have managed or comprehended this content. That is why this will give more weight, and it is also why, unfortunately, the MCAT score is going to carry more weight than the GPA. All right, so we've talked a lot about test score and GPA. Let's go on to those experiences. So AMCAS gives you 15 experiences and 15 more most meaningful. They expect that as you talk about these experiences, you're going to hit the 15 core competencies, which drives me crazy because it's not 15, it's not a one-to-one. Many of your experiences will overlap in those core competencies. Some may not reflect any of them, but when you write about your experiences, you want to make a list of these. You want to figure how many hours there are, what period of time, again, knowing that nothing from high school counts unless you started it in high school and it went all the way into college. So unfortunately, you can't count those high school experiences unless it's like we talk about Eagle Scout or Gold Award for Boys and Girl Scouts, but everything else has to be the summer before you started college and beyond. Those experiences should speak to what the experience was, what you learned, what you did as a part of it, how you grew from it, and a reflection of how it is meaningful. And again, this is one of the most important things. People make the big mistake of they speak but don't demonstrate. So they talk about what they did, but not how they grew from it or demonstrate their understanding of it. So we break the experiences into 5 categories: academic, clinical, service, leadership, and social. Ain't your dating schedule, okay? It is other things about you, because when we're interviewing and reviewing your application, we're looking at the type of physician you're going to be, as well as how you're going to fit into our med school class. So when we talk about academic, and we've already said 50% had the GPA and the MCAT, it's so much more than that. Academic is research. Now, research is not all or none, but if you're looking at a highly research organization, maybe Johns Hopkins or whatever, in one of the top research medical schools, you doggone well better have some research. And when I talk about research, I'm talking about a minimum of a semester, ideally a year or beyond, that includes either wet lab or clinically based research or both. It is, we're not really caring about, although publications, presentations help, and they are important. More importantly, we want you to understand what research is about. And I guarantee half of you guys got research out there. When you got your first research job, it was like going in the lab, going to be discovered. And it is not what research is about. It's about teamwork. It's about failures. It's about getting to know other people. It is about learning the scientific process. It's about all of the starts and failures that it takes to really conduct good, thorough research. Being a TA, a teaching assistant, tutoring, learning how to explain complicated information on a level that people can understand. And you guys have probably heard me, if you've heard me talk before, you can be the greatest physician in the world, but if you can't explain it in a level that your patients will understand, that they can believe in you, it doesn't matter. If you come in and somebody says, you got to tell them you've got diabetes, and you come in, you go, dude, you fat, you overweight, you got diabetes, you're going to die unless you, they're going to tune you out. You need to explain to them, I know that when my grandfather passed away, he had no idea that the sugars that he thought he has was his diabetes, and what made the sugars bad and why. You've got to be able to read people, understand them, and explain it. So doing things, either tutoring, working as a TA, working as a scribe where you explain something to other people, is very, very critical. Study abroad. It's not necessarily about you did a study abroad program, because that can be very hard for a lot of pre-meds because you're already trying to gather everything else. Study abroad is more about cultural exposure, understanding different cultures, different backgrounds, different races, different religions. So this can be accomplished by travel, either travel you've done alone or with somebody else, maybe taking a time during a summer if you're not ready to apply, and just travel and experience time on your own, being outside your own personal comfort zone, understanding different backgrounds, different cultures. Maybe your family or you personally immigrated to the US. Maybe you've had struggles that you've had to overcome, understanding underserved populations. All of this is gaining an understanding of people who are different from you. This is why, again, I preach about taking gap years, taking gap time, working in other areas so you know people other than just those in your little academic bubble. Okay, clinical experiences. So that covered academic, clinical. Probably two of the biggest areas where I see people fall short is not having enough clinical time and not having enough service work. So diversity of experience again trumps the quantity. Okay, they want you to know that you want to be a physician. How do you know you want to be a physician? You should aim for a minimum of 100 hours of clinical exposure. Shadow in 3 to 5 different areas. One needs to be primary care. Okay, so shadow your own physician, volunteer at an underserved clinic, do a medical mission trip abroad, and oftentimes take all of your shadowing, all of your different areas, and combine them into one experience on your application. So maybe it's been shadowing you've done from the time you started college to now and beyond. It's in 5 to 6 different areas for a total number of hours. That is going to carry much more weight in a screen than listing all of your shadowing individually. And be able to articulate what you learn about medicine. Honey, ain't never about you. Okay, medicine is about, it's not about you. It is not about the medicines that you treat. It is not about that whole, I want to help and serve and make a difference, because it is. It is about relating to people, not patients. Right now, as I told you, my own daughter is working 14 to 16-hour shifts in the ER, and she has talked about the pain and the struggle of watching people come into the ER where she works because of the restrictions, not being able to have their family members come back. And so just the other day, she called me on Friday. 2 people came into her ER and passed in the ER. One of them was a COVID patient, and her family couldn't come back. About sitting on the phone with this mother, calling her daughter and saying goodbye to her daughter. A daughter who could not look her in the eye, to hold her hand, to be there with her as she passed, as my daughter sat with her as she passed on, and understanding that that day a life was lost, and a family member that could not be with them, who would never see them again, who could never get to hear them one more time say something that was so meaningful to them. Understanding the role that we take. We don't treat patients, we treat people, and every person that comes into your practice has a family that's depending on them, that has a job that's depending on them, and understanding your role in helping and empowering them to do better. I read it over and over and over again. I want to improve someone's quality of life, but understand what that truly means. And at the end of the day, paid clinical, being a scribe or a CNA or an MA or getting experience as an EMTB, actually learning what it means to live that life of a physician. One of my students who got a job as a scribe the other day said, I don't want to do this. It's busy and I don't like what the physicians do. This is why we want you to do this, to understand the career you're getting yourself into is much more than I just want to serve and help, and I love science and I want to make a difference in the world. Understand why you want to create that difference. And every part of these experiences is about creating your brand. Everybody has shadowed, volunteered in a hospital, done the research, whatever. Understand what you gain through that and how you're going to make a difference in your application. Service. I cannot express this enough. Understanding those that you serve, how you impact a person's life through your service. It demonstrates a selflessness, boy, that's hard to say, and how you change through the service you do. I always talk to people, when we talk about service, it's a minimum of 6 months, 50 hours, something done on a regular basis. So where we often talk about things like getting involved with hospice, being with someone in those last moments when they die, mentoring someone else, be it through what we talk about, foster parenting or big brother, big sister. I'm going to tell you, my little taught me more than I think I ever taught her. VA, the forgotten people, people who are left behind, especially like right now, delivering meals with Meals on Wheels. Many of the people that you take a meal to, yes, you're providing nourishment, but more importantly, you may be the only face that they see. Understanding at the end of one's life, when you don't have family, when you don't have friends around, understanding how you changed through the service that you did, putting yourself outside your own comfort zone and having strong service. At least what I always tell is people, cast your net wide, shoot for 5 to 6 things to pick a minimum of 3 things that you've done over an extended period of time that has put you in direct contact with people. Now, I'm not saying don't volunteer at the hospital, don't do your alternative spring breaks and things like that with your school, because those are all good things to do that you learn through, but look for things that will set you apart to be different. And if you don't have those, and this is what med schools have said right now, there will be some forgiveness for maybe taking your MCAT later, but not having service right now. We expect you to have already gained your service and your clinical experience before now. And I realize a lot of those things have gotten shut down. And the problem may mean you may have to take that deep breath and go, I may have to wait till next year to apply because I may not have what I need right now. Leadership experience. Ideally, we'll want to see at least 2 leadership things. And I don't care if you're president of the Mickey Mouse Club or your whole university or whatever. It's about learning what makes a good leader. Somebody who other people can look up to, but also make them feel part of a team. And I guarantee all of you guys out there have had some leadership experience where before you applied for that leadership experience, you were like, yeah, I can do it better than them. And then you get in that role and you're like, why won't anybody follow me? Why won't anybody listen to me? How do you become a good leader? How do you inspire others? And that can be through a club. It can be a position in your sorority or your fraternity. It may be mentoring or teaching other people in the lab. It may be taking a lead role in an organization that you started. There are lots of ways to take on leadership roles, but ideally we want a minimum of 2. Social experiences. I have a lot of people who go, I don't want to talk about my sorority or fraternity. Well, if the only thing you write about is how y'all were a party animal, like you were the animal house, yeah, that's not going to help you. But living with other people, living with colleagues, taking leadership roles, being involved in clubs, and really outside interest. Now, my son just applied for residency, and he said the most interesting thing was at his residency interviews, he is a phenomenal woodworker, and they were so interested. He brought examples and things that he had done, and they were very interested in things that will make you different. And if any of you guys have shadowed, one of the key things is, as a physician, is being relatable, not being high and mighty, but can you walk in? Can you, well, we're not supposed to be shaking hands right now, but can you engage with your patient? Can you establish trust? And that means you need to be relatable. What are you going to be able to relate to your patients on outside of medicine? And I'm hearing it over and over and over and over from students right now, but I'm just so busy trying to keep up with my online coursework and everything. Medical schools expect you to be able to excel in your coursework, be able to make time for all of these other things, your clinical, your service, etc., because they are looking for the well-rounded applicant, somebody who has the GPA and the test score, who has all of the experiences, who can articulate that, and who can speak back to it. And I think if I can give you one piece of advice, you need to dig deep into your gut, because I was just like you guys, okay? I was the pre-med gunner, let me do everything. I thought I had it all going on, and I was so ready to apply, and I had worked for 4 years in a burn unit, and I often tell this story to my students, and I was like ready to apply. I'm gonna help, I'm gonna serve, I'm gonna make a difference. And the summer that I was applying, we had a couple that was brought into our burn unit, and they were on their way home from their honeymoon, and a drunk driver crossed the center line and hit them head on. Okay. And he was ejected from the car, and she was left in the car, and the car started to catch on fire. So he went back to drag his new bride out of the car, and as a result, he was burned over 70% of his body, 2nd and 3rd degree burns. And he was brought into our burn unit, and we had had him in our burn unit for over 2 months on a ventilator. And this day, and it will haunt me for the rest of our life, because it was the day that we were taking him off the ventilator, and his wife came in to see him, and I was actually in the room doing a dressing change on his wound. And so they were talking, and they were talking about wanting to take a second honeymoon, and he was really worried about his mom coming in that day to see him, and he was afraid he was going to scare her. And his wife said, honey, your mom has been here every single day. We've been cheering you on. And they were laughing and talking about the second honeymoon. He said he was going to have to wear big sombreros so that the sun wouldn't get on him. And the whole time I'm changing his dressing, and I'm like, this is why I'm going to be a doctor. I'm going to make people better. I'm going to do just like this. I'm going to help. I'm going to serve. I'm going to make a difference. And they had been talking for about 30 minutes, and he asked her to go get him a milkshake from the cafeteria. He said he was a little hungry and he was tired, and he asked her if she'd go get him a milkshake, and she like puffed up in front of him, and she was so proud about what she was going to do for him. And she went to go out the door to get him his milkshake, and I remember that the elevator doors were just outside the burn unit, and he pushed the button and the doors opened, and she got into the elevator, and she turned around and she realized he was looking at her, and she blew him a kiss, and he blew her a kiss back, and he said, I love you, and the doors closed, and tears are streaming down my eyes by this point. And he turned and he looked at me and he said, I don't know you, but I have a sense you've been here, and I just wanted to say thank you. And then I puffed up like a peacock, because it was like, yeah, I'm going to help these people. That's why I'm going to be a doctor. And he said, thank you. And then he turned his head to the side and he coded. He went flatline at that very moment. I pushed the button. They called the code. They ran the whole code, and they actually pronounced him before his wife got back upstairs. And I kind of lost it, because I was like, I can't do this. This is not going to be my career. And I remember I clocked out that day. I took 2 days off, and I came back into the clinic, to the burn unit, and my attending pulled me aside and he went, you don't get it, do you? And I was like, great, gonna lose my job too. And I said, I don't get it. And he said, yeah. He said, you're probably the best MA we've ever had here in terms of procedures, things you do. And I've watched you talk about how you're going to be a doctor and you're going to help and serve and make a difference. And he said, medicine ain't about you. It's not about the treatments we give. He said, it's about the people. He said, we knew that guy was going to die. I wish they'd have told me. He knew he was going to die. He fought to get back to that point, to share those moments with his wife, to give her memories she will cherish for the rest of her lifetime. And he said, but behind that patient who just passed away was a person. He was a husband to a wife who didn't get to say goodbye, to a mom who was a son to a mother who didn't get to say her goodbyes. We get an opportunity to have a glimpse into the lives of people. And he told me, he said, we are no more than auto mechanics. And I went, explain. And he said, we are trained with the tools and the knowledge to fix something, just like mechanics, but they fix cars. We have an opportunity to fix people, to give them the lives. You need to feel that in your gut and be able to articulate that in the things you've done and the experiences that you have had and your personal statement and your secondaries. And that's where we come to your personal statement. Why do you want to be a doctor? Avoid the cliches. I want to be a doctor. I love science. I want to help. I want to serve. All of those things. We want to read who you are. Why? I want to feel it from your gut when you articulate that. And then when it comes to your secondary applications, I will tell you, people put so much emphasis on the primary and that personal statement, probably the least important part of the application, because you got to get through the screen and all of those experiences. And that personal statement should stand out in my head to make me want to read more. It should have a catch and 3 to 4 things that articulate your journey, and then a bottom summary that reflects you back. That's how we help you articulate that. But when it comes to your secondary application, it should be the same thing. Remember, I had told you, most of these are automatically sent out. There are usually 4 to 5 essays. So when you're thinking about how many schools you're going to apply to, think how hard it was to write your personal statement. If most secondaries are automatically generated and I submit 25 schools and I get 4 to 5 essays, July and August, you could be staring at writing 100 different essays. Think about the school, be prepared, be realistic in building your school list. Oh, and Lord, please be careful of the copy and paste between your secondaries, because a lot will ask similar essays. But remember to copy. If you're copying and pasting, I don't know how many times I was like last year, if you're at Chapel Hill and all of a sudden I've read about how you really wanted to go to Georgetown, be very careful. Happens every single year. Not an automatic denial, but lets us know what you were doing. And then when we get to the interview, so many people get focused on giving a response to all the interview questions. But what you don't understand is, think about it about like a dating process. When you walk into a bar or a club or an event, it's not anything they've said to begin with. It is that first impression. So how you look, thinking about how you dress, and there are so many subtleties to that that you won't even imagine. 90% of men or women come in the dark suit with the white shirt and the dark tie, and aside from the fact you all look like penguins, you all look exactly alike. It is about choosing how you dress, how you present yourself, and more importantly, how you present the answers to your interview questions. Because the thing is, guys, we hear the same information over and over and over. How do you articulate your response so that you answer the question but highlight something out of your application? Because typically we'll go to committee a couple of weeks afterwards. So if I open your application, I need to go, oh, that was that sharp looking dressed dude who talked to me about his experience in Cambodia and helped me understand how he really knew what being a physician was all about. You need to be memorable, not one of a blend master in an interview. Gap years, as I already told you, cannot express enough how much we appreciate gap years. I have never had a student take a gap year that at the end of it all was not a better applicant unless they sat on a couch with their feet up in the air. All right, so our job here at the Princeton Review is to help you get in, and we help you get in by great grades. Right now, so many of you are struggling with the online coursework. The tutor.com can help you. They're open 24/7. If you're struggling with something and have not a clue, and if you're like me and you generally started studying at like midnight, you can get to them. Great test scores. The whole rest of this week is going to be helping you not just learn how to review the material for your test, but how to knock it out of the park, and great applications. Guys, you spend 4 years putting this together. Know how to couch your application for success, how you brand yourself, and how you fall and avoid the pitfalls, not only on your primary, but your secondary, your interview, and the whole process. We here in medical admissions, Dr. Morano and myself, I oversee our premier. Dr. Morano supports our comprehensive counseling. We can help you with your primary application, secondary, but most often it's the comprehensive and our premier counseling, which is start to finish totally with me. We've got all kinds of packages. You will get this link. You can go to our website and try our quiz that will sort of help you understand exactly what your medical application looks right now. You can use this link to schedule time to learn more. We're also actually going to send this out, but we've actually got a free app that you can do that is a whole portfolio builder that helps you know exactly everything that you should be incorporating into those experiences and the information that's important. Now I'm going to turn it over so we can answer a few of your questions, but if we don't get to them, please send them to us at review.com. All right, so real quickly, let's see if we can get to some of our questions. All right. I was homeless at one point while in my post-bac. Will that go? How will that go? Mentioning that in my application. Oh, I can tell you it will be phenomenal. Helping understand the adversity, what people go through. And I know you will understand just like others because I've worked with the homeless for years. And I will tell you that on the other side of it, understanding that homeless people are not just drug addicts who don't want to get a job, what it means, and there was a radio show that used to say that we're all one major hiccup away, one COVID virus from being not being able to being homeless, being on the street where we are. Dr. Morano, if you're out there, if there's anything that you want to add in as we go, I'm going to try to get to these pretty quickly. Does having 4 majors set you apart or have anything else in common? Actually, I think I got this question before the other day. AMCAS only really allows you to list the one. It is not about finishing in 3 years or having multiple majors. If we like to have a major in an alternate discipline, so like if you had chemistry, like you had a science discipline and an alternate discipline in like English, it absolutely would set you apart, but it's not going to outweigh those overall experiences. What impact screen do they screen? Masters together, undergrad, or together? Very good question. So you asked about the GPA that they screen. So they screen your undergrad GPA for your undergrad GPA and your science GPA. If you get master's level coursework, it is a completely separate GPA, but adding additional undergrad coursework is only going to figure into that undergrad GPA. If you graduate and then do a postbac, it will be seen, but I will tell you, if you're dealing with GPA issues, just adding additional undergrad coursework is not going to carry the weight of doing master level science coursework, because that's what our concern is. With so many canceled MCAT test dates, how will that affect the admissions process? Well, I sort of talked to you guys about thinking about that. So we already know that schools are going to be looking to accepting further test dates out. So that will be the good news, but still look for the application cycle to open at the same time, and we're going to have to close at the same time. There will likely be later test dates, so it will not be as bad as if you were initially testing in July, like in a certain year, but you've got to think about it. The first question you've got to ask is, where's my GPA and where are my practice test scores? Okay, and do I have the other stuff? They're going to give grace for later test dates, but if you don't have the clinical experience and you don't have the service and you were planning on adding that now and you're not going to be able to get it, you may want to think about using this as a gap year and taking one of those later test dates. If you're solid on those other parameters and your MCAT score is still not quite where you want it to be, you may want to think about submitting the end of May for a super reach school and wait to see your test score. If you're testing close to where you think you want to be and all else is good, then you may want to go ahead and add all your schools now. Like if you feel like you're pretty strong and you just haven't been able to get that test score. So there's a lot of ways where we can really help you with that advice. How do you compare applicants who were raised here but have international student status in terms of MCAT and GPA? Okay, so if you're a permanent resident, then you're kind of in that same pool. But if you're an international applicant, the rule of thumb is, what we always tell students is, you want to look at each individual school, look at their median GPA and MCAT, median, not their range, okay? If it's an out-of-state private school, for traditional applicants, a REACH school will be 2 to 3 points above your MCAT and about 1 point above your GPA. If you're an international applicant, it should be 4 points. So it's generally 2 additional points. So for an international applicant, a target school, your MCAT should be 2 points above their median. For a REACH school, 4 to 5 points above. Same thing, GPA, 1 point, 2 points above. So look at the median, all right, for your target and your REACH schools. And we often talk about safety, it's like 2 points below, but if you look at 40%, there are no safety schools. What determines in-state versus out-of-state? Every school, every state is different, but typically it is living in a school, living in an area for 1 year, having a job, or paying taxes, or where your parents file their taxes. And it's generally a minimum of a year. The same thing for international applicants. If you're looking to get green card permanent resident status, you're better to wait until you get that status. How does master's in public health as a science-based master's? Unfortunately, this is one of the things, oftentimes, people often think a master's in public health is going to be what they need, and it's not. And that's because there are very few science components of that. It's great for you for your future career, but for offsetting a lower science GPA, it is not. So I often tell people, if that's going to be an issue, I would save that master's for either doing it, because you can do a lot of dual degrees, but focus on a science-based master's. My questions disappeared. How's in versus out state? Got that. How does traditional? How does the application ask about traditional versus non-traditional? The application does not. We obviously have a status of that of looking for when you graduated. One thing you want to know is that undergrad prerequisites are typically only good for 5 years after you graduate, meaning from the graduation date, not the date you took them. But if you've been out of school for 3 years or more, we generally want to see that you've taken additional or more coursework as a part of what you go. And you want to talk about that exposure as more in your personal statement and definitely in secondaries. What do you recommend for someone who is in an MCAT retaker and the exam got canceled? Okay, so an MCAT retaker and the exam got canceled. If you are looking at, you got to look at what your base score was. Like I just spoke with somebody today who had like a 509 and was looking to retest in June. So I've already told her to go ahead and apply to all her core schools because that would get her typically through a screen. As long as your MCAT is in the 504 and above range and you're testing stronger, I would look at, for most schools, we're not going to screen out that early. If you have a super low MCAT, so let's say that you're more in the 480 to 490 range and you're looking at retaking, I might look to do that super reach school and do your retake in June or July. We're going to see a lot more of that. So I would almost consider myself almost like a first-time test taker. Going into my sophomore year of undergrad, should I start studying for the MCAT or is it too early? I think the biggest thing where we talk about is being too early is based on where you are in finishing the core prereqs. If you've got your core prereqs maybe minus biochem or the second physics, it's not too late to start studying. I oftentimes like to have people who are finishing their core prereqs the end of their summer year use the summer their second year to use the summer to prep, because that's super great if you're thinking of applying your junior year, because then you can test in the summer and retest in the spring. But if you're not going to finish your core prereqs until you're a junior, then think about taking that gap year. Finish your junior year, finish your prereqs, prep during the summer, then have the spring to retest, graduate, and then use your application year to get paid clinical. That is the score home run all the way. I think I've got a couple more here. Oh, we got a bunch more. There is no way we're going to get through all of these. I will take all of these questions and we will split them up and try to get the answers posted back out to you guys, because I've already taken us about 5 to 6 minutes over. And I think there are a lot of really, really good questions here. And so we will split these up and try to get these answers sent back out individually, because they will be hosted with where you were. But I want to thank all of you guys for joining us today. You guys have some fabulous questions out there. I'm willing to, Lauren, are you still on with us? And Dr. Morano, are you still with us?
Definitely.
Okay. I'm willing to go another 10 minutes to try to knock some of these out if folks would like to stay online with us. Do you have any problem with that?
No, go for it.
Matt, are you okay with that?
Yep, definitely.
Okay. You feel pretty good with everything we've been going here? Because I'm going to try to knock these out here. Guys, if you'd like to stay online, I'm going to try to answer the rest of the questions and give you as much feedback as possible. Junior studying, my question happens when GPA is good, but you're unsure about the experiences in the MCAT. What should we do? Oh, excellent question. What I always tell people to do is to sit down and write out all of your experiences. If you are struggling listing honor societies, shadowing each in separately to try to get to 15, you may not be ready. You should be having to combine experiences. You should never have to be listing honor societies, or you should group all of your honors together. You shouldn't have to listing publications separately, and definitely not shadowing. What we always say is the rule of thumb is you should have at least 12 experiences. And I will tell you, it's even a little bit of a red flag if you're falling below 12, but if the 12 are really strong. So sit down, write out what you would list for all of your experiences, see how heavily the clinical, the service, and potentially your research is listed. Make sure you have at least 2 leadership. Make sure you're strong on all of those parameters. First, in terms of your experiences, and you've got your GPA. Then if you're strong on both of those, then see where you're prepping on your MCAT. If your MCAT is close to your target, that would help positively enforce your GPA, then maybe continue on. But especially this year's already going to be a hot mess of who, then you may want to think, will it behoove me to take that gap year? And again, I can't stress this enough, guys. It is 1 year for your whole future. And if you're not prepared, you're going to be right back here next year anyway. You mentioned that MCATs would take 4 to 6 weeks to verify. Do you think they will speed up the process? Oh, Lord, no. If anything, it's going to slow down the process. There is way too much other stuff going on. And that's what I told you. It takes a minimum of 4 to 5 weeks to verify. That's why we push people to key as much as they can, have everything ready, have your personal statements, your experiences, your letters of recommendation ready. By the way, you can submit without letters of recommendation. Once you submit, you can add letter writers, you can delete letter writers who have not yet submitted, and you can change your MCAT date. But that is about the gist of what you can change. You cannot add to your experiences, your personal statement, nothing, and you cannot add experiences that have not already started. So no, it's going to take a minimum of 4 to 6 weeks, if not longer. For clinical experiences, do we need to observe a doctor one-on-one? I have clinical experience as a nurse where I have interacted with patients and physicians. Yes, absolutely. That totally counts. And a lot of people say, does it have to be a physician? Can it be a nurse practitioner, et cetera? It needs to be other providers. Okay, it needs to be mid-level, what we talk about, physicians, PAs, nurse practitioners, but also interactions as a nurse with a patients and physicians also does count. Okay, what are your recommendations with the pass-fail options? Oh, good question. Okay, so guys, this is really important. And again, we'll send you the link to the information. Online coursework from the spring will be accepted, okay? They have not made a determination for summer yet, but I highly, highly anticipate that they may recommend either taking summer classes will be okay online, or if you can avoid taking summer classes this year, try not to, unless you need them to graduate. In terms of pass-fail will be fine if approved by your school, but we strongly discourage that if you can still take your core prerequisites, biology, chemistry, organic chemistry, physics, biochem, for a grade, take it for a grade, even if your school offers pass-fail. If your school is not giving you an option and you have to take it pass-fail, what you need to understand is if you apply this year, you run the risk, and med schools have already said this, that they will accept and then make acceptance conditional on you getting a passing grade of C or above in those classes, so you may have to retake them. Is there a place to list language proficiencies? Yes, there is. And I will tell you, being bilingual, trilingual is a total plus, especially if as paid clinical shadowing or something that you've done, you can speak to being able to translate for others and the impact that that had. So absolutely, you do list your language on your application. My GPA was affected because of, and I am totally sorry, but oh, yes. And almost every application, thank you, I'm sorry, I had to relate to that, about a time where you were homeless or experienced something or whatever, almost every single secondary asked for, is there a reason, something you would like to explain, a time that you've overcome something? This is definitely something. We look for trends also. So you will be given an opportunity to explain that. However, if your initial GPA is low, you need to address that, and you can explain it later on, but that may mean taking that additional coursework or that master's level coursework, or having that strong MCAT score that can show that you have mastered that coursework. How do med schools view institutional actions? Institutional actions. So it is institutional actions and the number of those. Typically one, depending upon what it is, a med school will look the other way, especially if it's underage drinking tickets or a one-time ramification. Like I've had a lot of kids who maybe said there was something that their school had a zero tolerance on or whatever. Things that can be hard to overcome are DUIs, not underage drinking tickets, or expulsions. So sometimes there may be like a plagiarism where you get suspended. That may be something very subtle, and if you show where you overcame that. So it's the number of institutional actions. If there are repeated, so if you have 2, 3, and 4, it can be hard to overcome that, and the severity of those. If there is an expulsion, now again, that's not an all or none. If you can demonstrate how you grew from it, you were strong in it, and you did not repeat it. So maybe you had had, and I had somebody this week who had multiple tickets, and one was like a reckless driving. And I was like, well, was your reckless driving because you were doing 110 miles an hour? And he was like, no, I had a shoestring that got caught on my accelerator and I hit a tree. And the guy said they had to give me they had to give me a reckless driving because of it. That you can explain, and there is a place in the primary application to explain that. If we take some of our prerequisite at community college, oh, you guys make the best statements here. Try to avoid at all costs taking prereq classes at a community college. Take non-prereq classes to save money. Prereq classes need to be taken at a 4-year institution. This is also somewhere where those early college can really turn around to bite you on the butt. You need to take your core prerequisites. If it's one class, they will typically look the other way, sometimes two, but make sure it's not a lab-based course. Is it a bad idea to apply Caribbean med schools as a safety schools? Will it affect my chances of transferring later? Yes, it will. There are, and I can speak to this, guys, I will be more than happy to talk to you. When we talk about Caribbean, we typically say the big six. There is a core of that big six and where we are. You often will want to wait to apply to a Caribbean school until the spring. So if you apply in June, you may want to wait till the end of the application cycle, somewhere about now, before you would apply for a Caribbean backup. The rule of thumb is once you matriculate to a med school in the US, it is virtually impossible to matriculate into another US med school. Once you matriculate to a Caribbean med school, it is difficult to you can't transfer, you would have to start over. In terms of residency placements are based on board scores and your clinical letters of recommendation. So if it's a Caribbean school, you want to make sure that you do your rotations, your clinical rotations in the US. If you get good board scores and good letters of clinical reference, you will have a good shot. I have people who went to Caribbean med school for me who are doing surgical residencies at Duke and Stanford right now. With a perfect MCAT score, what would be the lowest GPA accepted? Last year, what we saw, it was a 3.1, a 3.2 with 519 and above. What courses are included in the science GPA? Actually, MCAS has a list of all that, and yes, science and math do count into that. Math, calculus, DiffyQ, all will count into your science GPA. Does that affect admissions in any way? And I forgot what the question was. All right, this one. Oh, yes, taking science at, yes, it does. And I just explained how taking it at community college. Does pharmacy tech fall into the experience category? It is good for people-person interaction. It is not considered paid clinical at the level of what an MA or a CNA is. So you will be able to highlight communication skills and understanding interaction and interaction with physicians, but not at the level of a CNA or an EMT or a scribe. Biomedical engineering major, lots of prereqs were harder myself. Unfortunately, and people often ask this, if I was in a harder major, but remembering that the baseline screen is going to be on GPA and MCAT, the difficulty of the major or the school really only comes in if you've made all of the other thresholds, experiences, etc., and you get to the interview, and then it's at the committee level. So if we're interviewing and we're reviewing at the committee level somebody who's interviewed with us, all things being equal, a harder major with a little bit lower test score versus an easier major with a higher GPA, that will balance out, but it has to get to that point. Does having a non-science major? Having a non-science major is uniqueness, but not enough to totally outweigh everything else. Oh, you guys are killing me here. I think I'm probably going to have to cut us off because, man, these do go forever. But we will try to get to, yes.
Need 1 second. I've actually answered a whole bunch of these questions on the right. I've typed in
Okay.
answers while you were talking on some of them. So
Awesome.
if you notice it, you can actually skip down through a bunch of them.
How? Where you should, would have been nice if you were working from the bottom up.
I did. I went to the bottom and started working up.
Okay, do you know how far you went?
All the way to the bottom and started working up.
No, but where did you stop? Do you know? Can you
Yeah,
help
hold on
me?
a second, I'll tell you exactly.
Oh, you are the bomb diggity.
Go to past 459 received.
Wait a minute. Oh, right here. Nope, that's 3 3.
Keep going. The next question I see for you is how early should you begin studying for the MCAT? I'm
All right.
currently a sophomore student, so if you want to answer that one, go for it.
So where am I? So Matt, right here, I'm on non-science major. My next one is my science GPA. You
What
were
time
answering
is it?
bottom up.
What time is it? What's the time mark?
Oh, Matt, I have no idea. It doesn't show.
Okay.
Okay, I tell you what, I'm going to cut it off right here. Dr. Morano, you kind of figure out where you were, and we will knock out the ones that are different from here. And we'll try to cover the ones in between. Thank you so much for answering the ones from the bottom up for me. And we'll try to cover the ones in between and get you answers to those as well. Man, 87 of you guys stayed on. That is awesome. I really appreciate the additional time and the chance to try to help and serve you guys. Again, Dr. Morano and myself are here to really help make sure that not only that you make the application the best that it can be, but more importantly, really to know how do you write that personal statement? How do you write those experiences? What makes a strong interview? Really helping you make the most, because it's a very expensive process and it's a lot to reapply. We wish you guys all the best. I know that there's a lot going on with the COVID crisis and everything else, and we thank you so much for your time, and we hope you take advantage of the rest of the series that we have for this MCAT week. Thank you guys so much and have a great day. Dr. Morano, you good?
I'm great. Thanks
All
for
right.
everyone for listening.
Thank you guys. Have a great day.